Podcast, where truth moves faster than a Holstein calf. No waiting on some pretty page. We're charting new ground in the digital age. From genomic codes to row-out facts, we cut through the noise, no holding back. Not your daddy's dairy news tonight. We're sparking debates with every insight. The ring's not where the real fight's at. It's in the data, in the channel chat. From pasture to processor to your morning cup, we're raising the stakes. Try and get ahead of herd. Yeah! Where the future's more than just a word. Ahead of herd. Come on. The Bullvine's calling, let your voice be heard.
Welcome back to the Bullvine Podcast, where we cut through dairy industry noise to get you the insights that actually matter for your operation. We are focused squarely on actionable intelligence for you, the producer.
And today we're diving deep into a feature piece that's been generating some serious buzz across the industry. Yeah. This topic has layers and some genuine surprises, actually, that are going to make smart farmers rethink how they've been approaching one of the most persistent and, frankly, costly problems on the dairy: calf health. We are talking about the long-awaited introduction of national genomic evaluations for calf resistance.
That's right. Our mission today is, to decode the hype, the science, and the skepticism around CDCB's new genomic calf health evaluations. These are set to launch in April 2026, so still a ways off, but the discussion is happening now. We are asking the $3,500 calf question. Will this new technology actually save you money, or is it just another extensive layer on top of what should be, basic management? We need to look at the cold, hard numbers from the devastating $350,000 annual economic hit that many operations are absorbing to the wildly variable $0 to $40,000 investment range this might require.
And what's fascinating here, what really jumps out, is that the answer depends entirely on the farm listening right now. It really does. This is not a universal fix, not by a long shot. If your current management protocols are broken, if your colostrum management is, inconsistent, or if your ventilation is poor, the best genetics in the world won't save you a dime. In fact, you'll just waste thousands on testing. Seriously. But if you're already doing a great job, if you're an elite operator with mortality rates consistently below 4%, this could be the free ticket to push you into truly unprecedented performance. So we have to peel back these layers of expectation and, skepticism, because the crucial details, especially concerning data contribution and heritability, they're definitely in the fine print.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Let's set the stage for why this is such a critical discussion right now.
Yeah.
We must start by defining our terms, just to be clear. We're talking about the Council on Dairy Cattle Breeding, or CDCB. That's the organization responsible for calculating and distributing genetic evaluations for dairy cattle in the United States. This is the official system we're discussing.
Correct. And the context here is, it's brutal. Let's be honest. We are talking about persistent, decades-long failure to fully solve a core problem. The industry, despite massive leaps in management, nutrition, and technology, still hasn't eliminated unacceptable levels of calf mortality. It's just a fact. If you look at the last comprehensive USDA survey back in 2014, that's a while ago, but pair that with recent Canadian research, which is more current, we are still persistently losing about 6% of our calves before they ever reach weaning. 6% nationally. That is an enormous amount of lost potential and, frankly, capital.
The 6%. And let's translate that 6% into something tangible for the farmer listening right now, because the stakes here are astronomically high. Replacement heifers are not cheap anymore, are they?
Not at all.
The USDA market reports are consistently putting the value of a quality replacement heifer in the $3,000 to $4,000 range, sometimes even higher depending on location and demand.
Wow.
So when you lose a calf, especially a promising heifer calf, you are literally watching several $1,000s of future revenue and capital investment just evaporate instantly.
You're highlighting the catastrophic loss there, the direct hit. And for a typical 1,000 cow operation, that persistent 6% loss turns into an annual financial hit that, when you really factor in everything, can easily exceed $350,000. That's why we have to pay attention to CDCB's upcoming launch. They are attempting to provide a tool, a genetic tool, that reduces those losses in the most cost-effective way possible by selecting for resistance before the calf is even born.
And crucially, they are targeting the right culprits, right? The root causes. We know, based on research like Erie et al., in the Journal of Dairy Science back in 2018, that scours or diarrhea and respiratory disease account for roughly 75% of pre-weaning deaths, 3/4 of them. So this new genomic evaluation, launching in April 2026, aims to breed genetic resistance specifically to those two most common causes of mortality.
Okay, but here's where the controversy starts, though, and where we get into the meat of the bovine skepticism, maybe? Is genetics truly the silver bullet, or is it merely going to amplify the success of farms that already have stellar, truly elite management? That cost variability we mentioned is absolutely key here. We're seeing entry cost estimates that range from $0, literally a free trait added to existing tests if you're already testing, to potentially $40,000, depending on the producer's current practices and whether they're already engaging in genomic testing through their Dairy Herd Improvement Association or DHI.
Right. That disparity in entry cost, that 0 versus 40 grand, coupled with the assumption of management excellence, that's the key challenge here, isn't it?
It really is.
If a producer is struggling with 8% or 10% mortality, their investment dollars need to go toward basic infrastructure and protocol improvement first. Things like
Colostrum.
better colostrum quality control,
Yeah.
improved passive transfer rates, enhanced ventilation in the calf barn, rigorous hygiene protocols, basic blocking and tackling. You need to invest $50,000 in management fixes first, not $40,000 in genomic testing that will, at best, only offer marginal help against deeply flawed protocols. It just won't work.
Exactly. But flip that coin, if you're already sitting at 3% mortality, maybe 4%, and you've squeezed all the managerial efficiency you can out of your operation, that $0 price tag suddenly looks very, very attractive, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
This is the tool to potentially push you from 3% mortality down into that elite, enviable 1-2% zone. It's an efficiency amplifier for the already efficient.
Okay. Now that we set the context and define the stakes, let's dive straight into the hard math, the economics of calf mortality and morbidity. This is where we break down exactly how that $350,000 annual hit is calculated.
Okay, let's run the numbers step by step. For that typical 1,000 cow dairy, right, you account for a 6% pre-weaning mortality rate. Average, maybe even a bit conservative for some. You're looking at losing approximately 54 calves every single year. 54 potential replacements or sale animals gone. That's not just potential profit loss, that's raw capital loss.
And when we calculate the direct loss, we factor in that replacement value. Let's use roughly $3,500 per potential heifer just as a working number.
Right.
That gives you a direct replacement value loss of around $189,000 annually. Just poof. Gone. That's money that has to be spent to purchase a replacement or money lost from not selling a valuable animal you raised.
Right, but that's just the direct loss, the obvious hit. We have to add what we call the sunk costs, and this is often forgotten, I think.
Yeah, people overlook this.
Before those 54 calves died, you had already invested labor, feed, milk replacer, starter feed, bedding costs, and critically, vet costs and medication. That's another, $15,000 to $20,000 of investment just disappearing into thin air.
Yeah.
You paid for the semen, you paid for the feed, the labor, the vet call, and you got absolutely zero return. Zip.
And if you are using expensive high genetic semen, which many are these days, that sunk cost on the front end is even higher, right?
Definitely.
But here is the part that truly hits farmers harder, I think, because it's the hidden, insidious cost. The one that keeps paying penalties long after the calf survives. We have to talk about morbidity, the calves that survive the scours or the respiratory infection, but are permanently damaged by the experience.
Absolutely. And this is where the Guelph research, specifically Winder et al. Back in 2022, provides the critical data point. It's really eye-opening. 6 survivors, those calves that made it past weaning and eventually entered the milting string, they produce over 700 kilograms less milk in their first lactation compared to their counterparts who never got sick.
Wow.
That is permanent biological damage expressed as lost yield. It's baked in.
700 kilograms less milk. That's over 1,500 pounds. That's not a one-time dip. That is a ton of lost production capacity over her lifetime, isn't it?
It is.
And beyond that, those 6 survivors are demonstrably less efficient in the herd. The research shows it. They calve later, dragging down herd efficiency and increasing the unproductive days in the string. And crucially, they tend to leave the herd earlier, meaning their productive longevity is permanently hampered. They just don't last as long. They are less productive, less fertile, and less durable, basically.
So when you synthesize all of this, you take the $189,000 direct replacement loss, the $20,000 in sunk costs, and then you factor in the permanent hit on first lactation performance and longevity from the dozens, maybe hundreds of 6 survivors. That total annual hit easily exceeds $350,000 for that typical 1,000 cow operation. Easily. And remember, that calculation is based on a conservative 6% mortality. If you're at 8% or 10%, you're looking at $500,000 walking out the door every year. Maybe more. That's the magnitude of the problem CDCB is trying to solve with a genomic solution.
And we must acknowledge how this immense annual cost impacts operations differently. It's not the same for everyone. If you are a massive 5,000 cow operation, you're looking at millions in annual loss from this. Millions. If you are a 300 cow operation, your annual loss might be closer to $100,000. Still a huge chunk of change, though.
Absolutely.
But the underlying necessity remains the same. The investment, whether it's in genomics or management, is only effective if the foundation is strong.
The necessity of strong management is the non-negotiable prerequisite for this technology. We have to keep hammering this point. As we've stressed, genetics will not salvage broken protocols. It just won't. If your mortality rate is high, say consistently above 5%, you have fundamental issues. Colostrum quality, hygiene, ventilation, something. You simply cannot expect a 2.6% genetic resistance trait to fix an 8% management problem. It's mathematically impossible. This technology is designed to push excellent management into elite territory, but it will never patch poor fundamentals. Never.
That brings us perfectly to the industry reality check then.
Yeah.
Assuming a producer is doing a decent job, managing well, let's transition into what exactly the CDCB evaluation is measuring, and importantly, why the numbers we're seeing are confusing people, specifically around heritability.
Yeah, it's critical to clarify the science here. We are dealing strictly with genetic predictions for resistance. That's all it is. We are looking at the calf's innate, inherited ability to cope with or resist the pathogens that cause scours and respiratory disease.
The data foundation is truly massive, which is important to emphasize, isn't it? This wasn't a small study.
Yo, huge.
The CDCB researchers dug through records spanning the last decade and were able to analyze over 200,000 diarrhea records and nearly 700,000 respiratory disease records.
700,000.
Yeah, the sheer volume of data tells you just how pervasive these problems are across the U.S. dairy landscape. It's everywhere.
And this data gives us perspective on the populations being studied, too. Holsteins dominated, unsurprisingly, making up about 80% of the data. Jerseys accounted for about 17%. And the initial source material notes that Jersey calves in this data set showed slightly higher disease rates, 17.8% for scours and 23.7% for respiratory disease, compared to 13.5% and 14.5% for Holsteins in the same data set. Now, this isn't a critique of the breed, not at all, but it demonstrates the need for comprehensive data across all major breeds for accurate prediction modeling. We need representation.
Okay, now, let's talk about the number that made a lot of people scratch their heads and, frankly, raise some skepticism. Heritability, often denoted as oh sure. We're talking about the genetic contribution to the observed variation in the trait. How much is genetics versus everything else? And the resistance numbers are shockingly low, especially compared to the production traits we're used to selecting for, like milk yield. We're talking 2.6% heritability for diarrhea resistance and 2.2% for respiratory disease resistance. Tiny numbers.
Yeah, that's the low heritability challenge, and this is where we have to pause and really explain why that number is what it is and why it's still potentially meaningful. If you're used to selecting for milk yield, which might be 30% or 40% heritable, maybe even higher for some components, then 2.6% sounds like statistical noise, doesn't it? It sounds like you are fighting an absolutely massive uphill battle for a minimal genetic gain that will just be swamped by the environment.
You're right to be skeptical, Heritability tells you that only 2.6% of the variation in whether a calf gets scours or not is due to its genetics. That's it. The other 97.4% is due to environment. Did it get enough high-quality colostrum quickly? Was the maternity pen clean? Was the ventilation system working right? What was the temperature outside? Was the milk replacer mixed correctly? All those factors, they dominate the expression of the trait.
Right. So why is CDCB pushing this if the genetic contribution is so small? Why bother? This is where the sheer magnitude of the data comes into play. That's the key. Low heritability means you need a massive number of records to find that small, faint genetic signal in the overwhelming environmental noise. If CDCB had only analyzed, say, 5,000 records, 2.6% heritability would be completely meaningless. You couldn't trust it. But because they analyzed 200,000 and 700,000 records, the statistical power is there. They can reliably estimate that small genetic contribution, even if it's tiny.
This allows us to deliver the Bullvine signature contrarian analysis here, moving past that initial skepticism about the low number. Dr. John Cole from CDCB basically reassured the industry, saying something like, don't worry too much about the lower heritability. It's about getting started and making progress where we can. Why is that statement so crucial? Because calf health, unlike milk production, is intrinsically deeply bound to environmental factors. So making any reliably selectable genetic progress, even small progress, is a win, isn't it?
It is, but it means we must temper our expectations, though. We have to be realistic. This isn't going to magically transform your calf barn overnight. It's just not. You are not going to eliminate scours in one generation using genetics alone. Forget it. This is going to be gradual, multi-generational progress, slow and steady. You might only chip away, say, 0.5% of your mortality rate per generation through genetics, maybe less. But when you compound that 0.5% reduction over 5 to 10 years, combined with parallel improvements in management, you have to do both. That really starts to add up to significant savings. It's an accumulation of marginal gains over time.
Okay, but what gets really interesting for me, and potentially validates the entire effort despite the low heritability, is the independence benefit. This is huge. The preliminary research shows that these new calf health traits appear to be genetically independent from everything else we select for: production, fertility, and longevity. The correlations are hovering near zero.
That is massive. That's the point producers really need to latch onto. If that independence holds up long-term, it means we might actually avoid the painful trade-offs we've seen plague genetic selection efforts in the past. We need to clearly define that risk. We call that an antagonistic correlation. It's a breeder's nightmare.
Yeah, let's use the analogy suggested in our notes to make this crystal clear for everyone listening. Think of it like balancing a high-performing race car, right? When the industry aggressively boosted the engine, selecting intensely for high milk yield, we often had to sacrifice the suspension, which was fertility and health. Remember those days?
Oh, yeah.
Big time. That was the classic antagonistic correlation. Gaining a point in milk yield often meant losing a point in reproductive efficiency or daughter pregnancy rate. It was a massive headache for decades.
So if these calf health traits are truly independent, genetically speaking, it means we can select for healthier, more robust calves without having to sacrifice a point of milk, a day of reproductive efficiency, or a dolly of productive life. That's the dream, really. This becomes an additive benefit. We can stack genetic improvement in calf health on top of existing gains in production and fertility rather than trading one for the other, and that makes the low heritability worthwhile because the cost of selection, in terms of sacrificing other important traits, is effectively zero if it holds true.
That makes the investment calculus much more compelling, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Assuming that independence holds. Let's follow the money now, because this is where the conversation gets incredibly nuanced for the individual producer. We established the $350,000 annual loss potential. Now, let's look at the investment required to tap into this genomic fix. It truly ranges from $0 to $40,000, and your current genomic status dictates your specific entry point.
It really is the tale of 2 farms, maybe even 3 or 4 farms. Let's start with the cheapest option, the best case scenario, which we call the free ride. This applies if you are already genomic testing your herd, especially your heifers.
Right. The zero cost applies because of international precedent. We've seen this happen in Canada, Australia, and other regions when new traits are added to the national evaluations. They're typically rolled into existing and historical genomic tests at no extra charge to the farmer. It's just part of the service update. If you've been testing your heifers for years, you could potentially have thousands of animals automatically evaluated for calf health resistance when this launches in 2026 without writing a new check.
Yeah.
This is a huge bonus, a reward, really, for those early adopters of genomics who already pay the cost of managing the data flow.
That's the reward for past investment, commitment to data. But let's look at the other extreme, the high cost. This is for the producer who has never genomic tested before and decides, okay, the $350,000 loss is too much. I need to go all in immediately.
That's where the $40,000 figure comes from for a 1,000 cow dairy. It's a big number. If you decide to test the entire cow herd plus all replacement heifers, that's roughly 1,000 animals, maybe more depending on your replacement rate, at about $40 per test. That's the bulk of it right there.
$40 a pop adds up fast.
It does. And beyond the direct testing cost, you also have to factor in potential software upgrades to your herd management system to handle the data. The labor required to swab or take tissue samples, ship them, and accurately log all those results, the data management time, which isn't insignificant, and maybe a premium you might pay for genetically superior semen, maybe $10 to $15 extra per unit to ensure you're using the highest ranked bulls for this trait. $40,000 upfront is a huge barrier to entry for many farms.
Which is why I think the smart middle ground is what most currently untested producers will likely look at first, or should look at. If you've never tested, you don't necessarily need to test the entire 1,000 cow milking string right away. That's overkill to start. Start smaller, validate the technology on your own farm, and test only your replacement heifers. That's where the future genetics are anyway. That's maybe, 450 animals annually for a 1,000 cow herd, something like that.
Yeah, around that number. And that significantly reduces your testing cost, bringing it closer to $18,000 annually, not $40,000 up front. It's less than half the full herd cost, and you still gain crucial information for guiding your immediate sire selection and shaping the genetic future of your herd. Seems much more practical.
But here's the crucial point for farm economics, the reality check maybe. Even if you spend $18,000, your first-year returns are projected to be modest. Very modest. Maybe $12,000 to $15,000 in reduced mortality and morbidity if things go well.
So not even breaking even year one.
No, this is not a short-term cash injection that pays for itself in 6 months. It's a long play.
Why is the return so slow then? Let's break that down.
Well, think about it. You are making genetic decisions today, selecting bulls based on this new trait. But those decisions don't manifest as live calves for 9 months. Gestation takes time.
Right.
And those calves don't enter the milking string and start generating revenue or avoiding costs for another 24 months after birth.
Okay, gotcha.
So you are not breaking even on that $18,000 investment until 24 to 30 months after you start breeding for the trait. And that's if everything goes right and your management protocols are already top-notch.
That requires patience and a long-term strategic view, definitely. Not for the impatient.
Exactly. The models do suggest that the annual benefits only really start to shine, really start accumulating by year 5. That's when you're milking a significant number of daughters from your highly ranked health bulls. By that time, projections hit annual recurring benefits of around $60,000 for that 1,000 cow herd. That's a significant return eventually.
But, and it's a big but, that $60,000 payoff by year 5 comes with the massive caveat we already stressed, right?
Always.
It assumes you are operating with solid, clean management protocols already, meaning your mortality is already down in the 3-4% range. For every percentage point higher your mortality is, say you are consistently at 7%, you should assume those financial projections are dramatically inflated for your situation, because the genetic improvement simply won't stick. It won't express itself fully in a poor management environment.
That's it.
This technology amplifies existing efficiency. It does not create it from scratch.
It's an elite tool for elite operations, or at least for those mid-level operations that are absolutely dedicated to fundamental management improvement first. Get the basics right, then add the genetics. Which leads us nicely into case studies and smart entry strategies, because we need to talk about the existing competition in the field, the Zoetis factor.
Yes, the Zoetis factor is critically important here because we are not waiting in a vacuum for CDCB's launch in April 2026.
Yes.
That's key. Zoetis has been offering proprietary wellness trait evaluations for many years, dating all the way back to 2016, I believe.
That's right.
They have a nearly decade-long head start in this specific space.
Yeah, their system, which draws from hundreds of thousands of their own proprietary records, has been integrated into major AI stud catalogs for years now. Farmers using certain bull studs will already see Zoetis wellness trait numbers, and it works reasonably well, particularly for those large operations, often in the upper Midwest and California maybe, that have been early adopters of their proprietary testing platforms like Clarified.
So why bother with CDCB then if Zoetis is already integrated and seems to work? That's a fair question.
It is.
Well, there are several compelling reasons. First, CDCB is drawing from a broader national population through the DHI system. We're talking millions of genotypes, potentially, from over 15,000 herds across the country. That gives it potentially wider applicability, maybe more relevance to more diverse management systems. Second, the CDCB methodology is transparent, it's peer-reviewed, and it's standardized across the industry. Everyone gets the same calculation. Third, and this is big for many farms, if you're already participating in DHI testing, there's likely no premium pricing attached to the data retrieval for the CDCB evaluation. It's integrated into the National Evaluation Service you might already be paying for indirectly.
Okay, but there's a discrepancy that producers absolutely must be aware of. The heritability numbers don't match up between the two systems.
That's confusing.
Zoetis reports about 4.5% heritability for scours resistance in their system, whereas the official CDCB number we discussed is 2.6%. That is a significant difference in perceived genetic influence, almost double.
It is puzzling, isn't it? The source material we looked at suggests this is likely due to different statistical approaches, maybe different ways they model the environmental effects. Or perhaps Zoetis is drawing from a population, those early adopter herds, that has managed environmental risk in a more standardized way already, thus allowing the genetic signal to be isolated more clearly in their data.
Could be.
It's not necessarily a contradiction, maybe, but it means they are looking at the trait through slightly different lenses, using different data pools and models.
The practical implication for the farmer listening is this. Once CDCB launches in 2026, smart producers will compare the bull rankings between the two systems side by side. It's crucial. If they align, meaning Bull-A is ranked high for calf health by both Zoetis and CDCB Great, you have independent validation, more confidence. But if they diverge, where Bull-A is high on Zoetis but just average on CDCB or vice versa, that's when you have to start scratching your head and figuring out which system predicts best for your specific barn environment, your management. This comparison is a free, powerful validation step you absolutely should take.
Speaking of smart producers and practical steps, let's review those 4 practical strategies for entering the genomic calf health space, particularly for those farms who have never tested before. The goal here is risk management and on-farm validation.
Okay. We covered option 1, the free ride. If you're already testing, you're probably set. Just confirm it. For everyone else, we really advocate starting small and validating. So option 2 is the heifer-only testing. We talked about that $18,000 annual investment for a 1,000 cow herd. Testing your 450 or so replacement heifers immediately gives you data on your future milking string and allows you to use those evaluations in your immediate breeding decisions. This is probably the recommended entry point for most solid mid-level farms with good management already in place.
Then there's option 3, the gradual build. This is excellent if you want to spread the cost out and truly validate the technology on your own farm before expanding significantly. Maybe test just 100 to 150 animals per year, heifers preferably. That costs maybe $4,000 to $6,000 annually, which is much more manageable financially than $18,000 or $40,000 all at once.
Much easier cash flow.
Exactly. If it works well on those small cohorts after a couple of years, then you can ramp up. If it doesn't show a benefit in your system, you minimize your financial loss. This is the most conservative, risk-averse approach.
And finally, option 4, the bulls-only approach. 0 testing cost on the female side. You simply select sires based purely on their CDCB calf health evaluations when they launch, assuming the AI studs publish them clearly.
While financially easy, this is definitely suboptimal for making rapid genetic progress, isn't it?
Oh, for sure.
You can bring in better genetics through the sires, but you won't know which of your cows are genetically better or worse for this trait. So you can't do targeted corrective mating to maximize the genetic gain because you lack data on the maternal side.
You're flying half blind.
Exactly. It's a cheap entry, yes, but it leaves a massive amount of potential gain on the table. The sweet spot, we'd argue, is probably that heifer-only testing to get the foundational data needed for both selection and, crucially, validation.
Okay, let's move to future implications now, because this is the challenge that nobody in the industry really wants to talk about openly, and it's the critical issue of data contribution and the risk of selection bias. If we don't get this right, the national evaluation risks failing a large segment of the dairy industry, the very farms that might need it most.
This is the most serious concern for me personally because it directly impacts whether the prediction model is actually relevant to the local producer listening right now, wherever they might be. The Canadian research by Renault et al. In 2023, which is probably similar in the U.S., estimated that only about 12% of dairy farms systematically record calf health data in a usable format.
Only 12%.
Think about that. 88% of farms are essentially invisible to the geneticists building these models. Their data isn't in the system.
And who are those 12% that are contributing data? Let's be real. They're typically the large, often very well-managed operations. They have dedicated calf managers. They use sophisticated automated record systems like DairyComp 305 or PC Dart. And they probably already have lower than average mortality rates because they focus on it. This creates massive selection bias. The evaluation is built entirely on the data coming from the genetic and managerial elite.
What's fascinating and worrying here is that the genetic evaluations end up being optimized naturally for farms that look exactly like the ones contributing the data. It makes sense statistically, but it's a problem practically. Let's break down the practical implication. If, say, 80% of the contributed health data comes from large freestall operations in Idaho or California, where calves are housed in individual hutches under specific, often very controlled temperature protocols, then the prediction model is inherently designed to work best in that specific environmental context.
Right. So if you're a smaller operation with a completely different management style, say a seasonal grazing operation up in Vermont's Northeast Kingdom, where calves might be raised in small groups on pasture with different pathogen exposure, or a traditional tie stall barn in rural Pennsylvania with totally different ventilation dynamics and maybe older facilities. The genomic prediction for a particular bull, based on data from Idaho free stalls, might simply fail to translate into better calf health on your farm. It might not work. The genetic merit that works in a highly controlled, high-input freestall environment might not express itself or might not even be beneficial in a lower-input seasonal grazing environment because the environmental stressors, the challenges, are fundamentally different.
This raises the absolutely critical need for broader data sharing. It's essential. For the evaluations to become truly representative and locally validated across diverse systems, producers simply must actively authorize their Dairy Records Processing Center, the DRPC, to transmit their health data to CDCB. And they need to use a specific mechanism known as Format 6 for health data.
And we should probably define what those acronyms mean for the average producer listening because it can sound like jargon. The DRPC is the entity that processes your official DHI records. They're the keepers of that massive repository of data about your cow's production, reproduction, etc. Format 6 is simply the standardized digital format used to transmit specific animal health event codes, like a code for scours, often O1, or respiratory disease, O2, from your farm management software, like DairyComp, to the National Genetic Database at CDCB. It is the crucial digital bridge between your specific farm data and the national CDCB model. Without it, your farm's experience doesn't count.
And we know, based on conversations with DRPC folks and industry insiders, that participation in Format 6 data sharing is currently, well, lower than ideal is the polite way to put it.
Yeah, very low in some areas.
It's a vicious cycle, isn't it? If you're a smaller farm or have a unique system, you desperately need the data to be validated in your local environment so the predictions work for you. But if you don't contribute your data, the system will never include your environment in the validation pool, and the bias just persists or gets worse.
And this risk of selection bias also ties into a wider industry gap we've unfortunately seen develop since genomic selection really took off back in 2009. Research consistently shows that large herds, those over 500 cows, have progressed genetically much faster than small herds, those under 100 cows. The genetic merit gap between large and small herds has widened significantly, not narrowed, over the last 15 years.
And this new calf health trait, as important as it is, risks widening that gap even further. Why? Because successful implementation requires two things that aren't equally distributed. First, detailed, rigorous, consistent record keeping, which takes time and often technology. And second, often that initial investment, that $18,000 maybe for heifer testing, which is a bigger hurdle for smaller operations.
Yeah.
The massive specialized calf raising facilities in places like the central sands of Wisconsin or the huge automated dairies down in Texas are simply better positions structurally and financially to benefit more rapidly from this than, say, the traditional 80-cow mixed farms in Michigan or Ohio.
Right. It's those mid-sized operations, maybe the 300 to 800 cow herds. They're the ones who truly have to wrestle with this decision the hardest, I think. They have significant potential losses, but they also face that real risk. Is the $18,000 investment worth the risk of selection bias if my specific environment isn't well represented in the data model yet? They need to be extremely cautious, ask the right questions, and they absolutely need to implement rigorous validation measures on their own farm before they scale the investment significantly.
That transition leads us perfectly into our contrarian take section. How exactly do you know if this technology is actually working for your specific farm, given all this potential for data bias and the fundamentally low heritability we discussed? The answer, bluntly, is that the technology requires obsessive record keeping, and we mean that literally. No cutting corners.
Yeah. That's the first hurdle, and it's a big one for many farms. If you want to use genetics to drive improvement in a low heritability trait like this, you need a quantifiable baseline, period. You cannot manage what you don't measure. It's an old saying, but it's absolutely true here. That means you must document every health event consistently, not just when a calf dies, but every single time you treat for scours, every diagnosed case of pneumonia, every time you use an antibiotic for a calf issue. Log it all. And crucially, you must also document the healthy calves accurately to create a necessary control baseline for comparison. You need denominators, not just numerators. If you can't consistently record everything accurately, you'll never be able to reliably validate whether the genetics are actually making a difference on your specific operation. You'll just be guessing.
Okay, so assuming you can commit to that level of record keeping, we need concrete checkpoints. Let's outline the necessary validation timeline that every farmer should adopt if they decide to invest time or money in this technology, starting from the April 2026 launch.
Right. The first critical checkpoint comes around 12 to 18 months after you start consistently using the top health sires. So we're looking at late 2027 or early 2028, depending on your calving interval and when you adopt it. This is when you'll have enough calves born from the genetically superior bulls to make a fair comparison against the cows born during the same period from your average sires, or your historical baseline if your records are good.
What is the target you should be looking for then? What's a realistic expectation for improvement given the low 2-3% heritability?
You should be aiming to see the calves from your top genetic health sires showing maybe 20% to 30% lower disease incidence rates compared to the calves from your average sires. Note, we set the target relatively high, a 20-30% reduction in incidence, not overall mortality, because of the huge economic value of avoiding morbidity, the sick but survived calves we talked about. Reducing treatments saves money directly. If you run that comparison on your own data, and there's no measurable difference in scours or respiratory incidence, if the rates are identical between the high genetic group and the average group, then the prediction model is likely not working effectively for your specific barn environment, and you need to adjust your breeding strategy immediately. Don't keep throwing money at it.
And we also need to watch for those unexpected negative correlations at this 12 to 18-month checkpoint, right?
Yeah.
The unintended consequences.
Absolutely critical. Are those genetically healthier calves perhaps growing slower than expected? Are their birth weights creeping up too high, leading to more calving difficulty for the heifers?
Yeah.
Genomic selection, if applied narrowly or incorrectly, can create new problems just as easily as it solves old ones, particularly if the selection index isn't balanced, or if the trait is linked to unintended metabolic pathways we don't fully understand yet. Watch closely. Okay, the second checkpoint is around 24 to 30 months after implementation. This is your financial check. Time to look at the dollars and cents. You should be approaching that break-even point we discussed earlier, especially if you made an initial investment like the $18K heifer testing. You need to calculate not just potentially reduced mortality, which is hard to prove statistically in the short term, but more tangibly reduce treatment costs and reduce labor costs associated with sick calves.
Yeah.
Are you buying less medicine, spending less time treating?
Unmeasurable savings.
If you're still deep in the red financially after 30 months, it might be time to seriously consider pulling the plug on the specific genomic investment strategy and redirecting that capital back into core management fixes or other technologies with faster ROI. The return must be demonstrable within about 30 months.
And the ultimate definitive test comes later, around 36 to 42 months. That's 3 to 3.5 years out. This is when those first heifers conceived using your high health sires actually enter the milking string. This is when you check their actual performance, production, and fertility, especially against their herd mates born from average sires during the same period.
Exactly. If their production is significantly below their genetic predictions, or if their fertility is tanking, if they're failing to breed back on time compared to their contemporaries, then you're seeing those dreaded antagonistic correlations emerge in your herd. That's proof. That means the genetic improvement you thought you were getting in calf health came at a hidden, economically damaging cost in another, potentially more valuable trait like milk or reproduction. If you see that pattern emerge, you must aggressively adjust your sire selection index or your emphasis on this trait because the promised independence benefit failed to hold true in your specific herd environment or with the bulls you chose.
So given all these risks, the low heritability, the data bias, the need for obsessive records, a long validation timeline, the potential negative correlations, the practical implementation strategy must be fundamentally conservative, shouldn't it? You don't just jump in feet first.
Absolutely not. That would be foolish. When April 2026 rolls around and these evaluations become available, our advice would be use the top-ranked calf health sires for maybe only 20% to 30% of your breedings initially, not 100%. That's enough to establish a good, statistically relevant validation cohort on your farm without betting the entire future genetic base of your herd on an unproven concept in your specific environment. Furthermore, a crucial point. Stick with proven, high-reliability bulls, especially at first.
Good point.
This is not the time to gamble on unproven young sires with low reliability for this new low heritability trait. We need reliability estimates well above 50%, preferably higher, for this new trait to have even moderate confidence in the prediction actually working. Use proven sires.
Okay. Before any producer commits to the $18,000 or $40,000 investment, or frankly, even if they're getting the evaluations for free as part of their existing testing, they must ask their Dairy Records Processing Center, their DRPC, these 3 key questions. Get answers before 2026.
Question 1, and this addresses the selection bias risk directly. Ask them, what percentage of herds in our specific region are actually contributing calf health data using Format 6 right now? Be specific about your region. If that number is really low, say below 20% or even 30% in your area, you should have major skepticism about whether the national prediction is robust and relevant for your local climate, housing, and management environment. If very few local farms are contributing, the prediction might be essentially irrelevant to you, statistically speaking.
Good question. Question 2. Ask them, can you show me a side-by-side comparison of the upcoming CDCB rankings and the current Zoetis wellness rankings for the bulls we are currently using or considering? This tells you whether the two biggest players in the space agree or disagree on the genetic merit for health for specific bulls. Significant disagreement requires extreme caution and further investigation.
And question 3, the practical one. What is the actual process, the steps involved, and the potential cost for setting up Format 6 health data transmission from our specific herd management software? If you use a system like DairyComp 305, it might require different modules, different setup costs, or different technician visits than if you use PCDART or another system. Know your potential upgrade path and labor costs up front to ensure you can provide the consistent, accurate data needed for your own validation efforts down the road.
And here's the bonus question, maybe the most important one for those already testing. Get it in writing, if possible, from your DRPC or DHI center. If I'm already genomic testing my heifers, will my historical tests automatically receive these new CDCB calf health evaluations in April 2026 at no extra charge, based on expected international precedent?
Yeah, nail that down.
Get that assurance now so you know if you are indeed getting the free ride or if there might be unexpected fees associated with accessing the new data on old samples.
Okay, that sets up our actionable insights segment perfectly. Covered a ton of ground. The farmer listening just finished morning chores. They're driving to the feed store, maybe listening to this. What are the 3 things they need to take action on from this entire discussion? Immediate, medium, and long-term actions.
Okay. Immediate action, and this is for this week, right now. Perform an honest, rigorous, data-driven assessment of your current pre-weaning mortality rate. Be brutally honest. If it's consistently over 5%, your investment focus, your time and money must be only on management fixes first, full stop. Colostrum quality and delivery. Ventilation, sanitation protocols, maybe staffing or training. Genetics are wasted money if you're above 5%. Stop looking at the bull catalog and start looking critically at your calf barn protocols and environment.
Second, immediate action, and this is for everyone listening, regardless of your current mortality rate. Call your Dairy Records Processing Center today or this week. Authorize Format 6 data transmission for calf health records. If you haven't already, find out how to do it. You need to start contributing to the national data pool to help improve its accuracy and relevance for everyone, including yourself eventually. And you need to ensure your own data systems are ready for the transition if you plan to use these evaluations. This step costs nothing but time and is vital for the industry's future success with this.
Okay, medium-term strategy. Looking out over the next 3 to 6 months, maybe planning for next year's budget cycle. If your mortality is already in that sweet spot, say 3% to 4% consistently, and you are not currently genomic testing, you need to seriously consider budgeting for that $18,000 heifer-only testing option. Think of it as your validation ticket, your entry fee to see if this works for you. At the same time, starting now, establish those consistent, detailed, obsessive record-keeping protocols for all calf health events immediately. Include healthy calves as controls. You need a clean, consistent baseline before the evaluations even launch.
And the long-term positioning, looking ahead to the April 2026 launch and the years beyond. When the evaluations finally drop, integrate them cautiously and strategically. Don't go all in. Only use top-ranked calf health sires for maybe 20% to 30% of your breedings initially. And as we said, always stick to sires with high reliability, preferably above 50% or even higher for this trait, especially in the first couple of years. Select defensively.
And maybe most importantly in the long term, commit mentally and operationally to that 18-month and 36-month validation checkpoint schedule we outlined. You have to track your own results. You must know, based on data from your own farm, whether the technology is actually working in your environment and whether you are seeing that targeted 20-30% reduction in disease incidence before you expand its use further. If you don't validate rigorously, you risk throwing thousands of dollars year after year at a technology that might be biased against your specific farm environment, or worse, one that may be introducing antagonistic correlations you didn't anticipate and are hurting your bottom line elsewhere.
Yeah. This has been a massive deep dive, hasn't it, into what is arguably the most economically impactful new genomic trait we've seen introduced since maybe longevity or fertility traits came online a decade or more ago. It tackles that potential $350,000 problem head on, which is huge.
The technology is real. The science seems sound, and the potential $60,000 annual benefit by year 5 is certainly compelling for well-managed herds. But its success hinges entirely on matching the tool to the specific farm situation and, critically, having those robust management basics locked down first. It's not magic. If you have questions about this, or if you want to share your validation journey once these traits launch in 2026, send your feedback to us at editorial@thebullvine.com. We'd love to hear producer experiences.
And seriously, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We're releasing episodes twice weekly now, covering timely topics. Head over to www.thebullvine.com for more analysis that challenges the status quo and provides actionable advice based on the hard numbers, not the hype.
And trust me, you don't want to miss what we've got coming next week. We'll be talking about the structural changes affecting U.S. market dairy contracts and how they might impact your forward pricing strategy heading into next year. We'll be breaking down the forces shaping your milk check next time.
Thanks for joining us for another deep dive from the Bullvine Podcast.
We'll see you next time.